Hey, what's going on, guys? So when I started PoE 2, I wanted to build the successor to Ice Shot. I saw Ice Shot was in the game, and to much to my surprise, it didn't even freeze enemies when the game first came out. Even after post-buff, Ice Shot has sort of really been a shadow of its former self. So luckily for me, though, I did stumble upon its spiritual successor. In my opinion, I really missed the screen-wide clears, the projectile chaining, the explosions, hail device explosions that seem to last the entire map. And so if this is what you're looking for, this is definitely the build guide for you. Surprisingly, this build is quite cheap. The estimated price, I think, is around 80 exalts to get it into mid-tier maps. I will note that if you're looking to trivialize a lot of the endgame content, there are some really incredibly broken builds right now. I do think that this build is on the chopping block for a nerf in one way or another. But with proper investment levels, you can get this build to delete pinnacle bosses. I just think there are other builds that can do it more efficiently and with a lot less investment. And as another warning, this is a really squishy build. And I say that as squishy as in you have to actually respect enemies. Misstepping will get you killed, especially with the on-ground effects as they are in this current version of the game. That really is sort of just the nature of glass cannon builds. However, more experienced players will tell you that the best safety is to never let the enemies attack in the first place. And luckily for us, our build is 360 degrees and we freeze consistently. We have a lot of inherent safety with the way that we clear, and I've leveled this character quite comfortably up to level 93. I've killed multiple pinnacle bosses with it, that difficulty 2 or higher. And as a disclaimer, I'm trying to make this build guide with the intent to make it as clear and obvious possible to new players how to build it, and also all the pitfalls that come with it, and the actual quirks of running a build like it is in its current state. So basically what Volley does is that every time we consume a frenzy charge, for each frenzy charge consumed, each of the 24 arrows that we shoot out in this big AoE circle will chain additional time. And not only will it chain additional time, it also will deal more damage. And if you pair this with a buff called Combat Frenzy, we can basically get back those frenzy charges that we consume when we cast it by freezing the enemies after the cast. And for single target, we can simply use Stormcaller for most of the bosses. Once you hit higher difficulty, like difficulty 4 map bosses or difficulty 2 pinnacle bosses, I do recommend swapping to the Lightning Rod Orb of Storm shenanigans. This is a common way for Lightning Bow build to delete bosses. You simply just turn off your Combat Frenzy and turn on Cast on Shock to quickly get through the map boss. So to go over the gear, basically we are a standard elemental attack build. There aren't that many elemental attack builds right now. Most people are going phase conversion. But we do have some few key differences from those types of builds. One, we're stacking flat elemental, cold, and lightning between our gloves, rings, and bow. 2, we need a lot of crit chance and crit bonus from any pieces we can get. Our jewels need to be very strong to compound our damage. And 3, our attack speed is not as relevant on our build as it is on others. We are simply a quality over quantity type of build. Our average hit needs to be as high as we can get it because you really only want to click that button once per screen. So to go over the gear, on our bow, we really want the high base crit, high flat elemental rolls. The second most important thing here is a high percentage elemental roll followed by bonus. This should run you anywhere from 10x to, maybe a div. Just keep in mind that the highest elemental tier is roughly 10. And it's more important to have high cold than it is to have high lightning, since you want to be able to freeze consistently for a Combat Frenzy. Keep in mind that you do not need a dual string, and this does not affect our fireball in any way. I've done some testing on that. Let me know if I'm wrong here. So for our gloves, this is the most important place for us to get flat damage past our bow. It rolls up to R9 in both stats, and you'll notice that it's about as high as the bow gets, maybe like 40% less than where the bow gets. And if you get that plus 1 or 2 useful rolls, this is a very good set of gloves here. They can be very expensive to get anything more impressive than this. And for the rings, you want to have high flat rolls that roll up to R9 and prioritize life and resistances and attributes if you're missing that. You really want to try to pull the build together with these pieces. And for the quiver, it should be mostly flat damage and bow damage with crit chance and bonus. Try to get a mana gain on kill roll here or somewhere else on your gear. I think you can also get them on the gloves and maybe on the bow, but just get one roll anywhere. It's fine. Otherwise, your clear will feel a bit awkward. And so for the amulet, have a high spirit roll and maybe intelligence or one of the attribute that you're missing. Crit damage and crit chance is a bonus, but sort of unnecessary here. Your goal is to get another 45 to 50 spirit from the amulet alone. This will help you fill out the high spirit requirements with all the different auras that we're running. For the chest piece, go for a high evasion piece that rolls up to 1.5k evasion and any other bonuses you can get. If you're lacking spirit, you also can get it here, but this would make you a lot squishier. I really don't recommend this. And so for the belt, boots, and helmet, it's all pretty standard. Get life, resist, movement speed, attributes. This is sort of the place. These should be your last pieces that you buy to really fill in and hit the requirements that you need to get this build to work. And for the jewels, really important stuff. Do not skimp out on these. They should be roughly 10% more damage per jewel. That's how strong they are. Get as much damage, crit chance, crit bonus, all from these jewels. It will add up. Trust me, do not skimp out here. And so to go over some reference points of how far you might be on gearing, right now I'm sitting at level 93 with 2.3k life. My Spiral Volley is hitting a critical hit chance of 30% with a crit bonus of 360. Stormcaller tooltip DPS is about 60k. This gets up to about 110k if I do put the DPS sport gems on there. This is up to you, optional if you want to pull through with that version. Cold penetration and lightning penetration around 40% on both resistances. All my resistances are capped other than chaos, which I'm sitting at 20%. This is totally optional. You can choose to invest more into chaos, but I ended up investing it into rarity. I feel like 20% is just fine, and I'm running Rippy 30% tier 18 maps. Up to you, your sort of margin for risk there. Over 80% chance to evade without acrobatics, and when I spec that in for boss fights, that becomes like 55%. I'm running a 24 mana gain on kill on my quiver. Okay, so I'm going to take a short section of this video to really explain how crit builds scale. I think this is the biggest pitfall of new players is they try to build a build like crit. The reality is that crit builds need you to pay attention to every affix. This is because we need to scale in tandem 4 different parts of our damage. And let me go through a small section here to explain that to you. So our damage formula is pretty simple. We have flat damage multiplied by any sources of increased, which are like your percentage increased damage, percent increased elemental damage, percent increased damage with bows, multiplied against any more multipliers, which are just keywords that say more, like more elemental or more attack damage, and then multiplied by our average crit. And then that gives us our average damage per hit. To make a successful attack crit build, you need to raise all 3 of these in tandem. You cannot skimp out on any of these. For example, notice how our 2 rings combine at up to basically as much flat as our bow gives us. Including the gloves, we're getting roughly 2.5 times our bow's elemental damage. Simply put, if we double our flat using gloves and rings here, we double our output damage on those rolls alone. Increased damage sources are not as valuable here because we already have lots of it, but it does add up in large quantities. For example, notice the big one is getting increased elemental damage on our bow's runes and affixes. For more sources, we only get a few of these because the game intentionally makes it rare. You'll mostly see these on support gems, but just 1 or 2 of these more support gems will increase your damage by at least 50%. For example, concentrated effects support alone is 40% more damage by itself. So crit is a much heavier to invest into stat, but it does add another layer of more multiplier to our output damage. You can calculate how much damage you're getting by calculating average bonus. For example, if our crit chance is 30% and our crit bonus is 300%, this gives us roughly 90% more damage on average. You can manipulate those numbers to see how much crit chance and bonus you will get to scale your damage further. So to go over some common pitfalls, my enemies are freezing, I can't maintain frenzies. Simply put, you need to deal more damage. Freeze chance is about how much damage you're dealing relative to the enemy's toughness. You likely need better gear. I'm too squishy, I get one shot. life rules are super important in PoE 2. You want at least 2k life going into mid-tier maps. I highly recommend trying to push 2.5k to feel comfy. Other than that, best defense is just not getting hit. Attack while the enemies are farther away. My tooltip is lower than yours, but I had the same gear. Most likely your rolls are too low or you forgot to invest into your jewels. Remember, R9 and R10 are the max rolls for lightning and cold, and you want to have close to the highest on all 3 pieces of gear and also on your quiver. I can't kill bosses, I run out of mana or don't have damage. With glass cannon builds, you really need to hit a certain level of DPS for these to feel good. This is the nature of glass cannons. I recommend double checking your gear. Your goal is to get it such that you can kill bosses easily within 1 mana flask with the lightning rod setup. For leveling, I don't recommend starting Spiral Volley, especially if you're new to PoE. It needs the flat elemental on the gear to really get going. I will link FubGun's LA leveling guide below to follow through the campaign. I think around level 80 to 85 you can swap into the Crit Frenzy tree, which I think is similar. I think it's more important to have damage gear ready than to hit a certain leveling breakpoint if you're considering that swap. If you want to get into Spiral Volley earlier, you can buy double, triple elemental quivers and run Whittle Hail up to mid-tier maps. Should be relatively cheap to set up, but I do recommend at least getting flat elemental on your gloves. And to finish up with some notes about the physical barrage setup, I have not played the physical version myself, but I've tested barrage on elemental gear and have determined it's too clunky or outright malfunctions, especially when you've not invested into accuracy. And from what I've seen, the physical versions are squishier because they're running more uniques, which I do not recommend if you can avoid. We already are squishy as is. And it also, with running more uniques, you have less potential for MF, as MF rolls the best on rare gear right now, except for the shield, of course. But yeah, it also has a lot less potential for EVES hybrid setup, which if you really want to make your build beefy, that would be the way to go. And the lightning rod cast on shock setup is just too OP. Right now, it's just the most broken thing for bow lightning builds. But yeah, that's it from me, guys. I appreciate if you're watching this far. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be sticking around to answer anything you guys have.